सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The Chinese have issued their China Standard Map 2023 edition. They can issue this map at any time of the year, right? But they choose those dates. So this time they've chosen the date of August 28. It's been spliced neatly between the BRICS summit in Johannesburg and the upcoming G20 summit in India. The idea is just to get everybody irritated and het up. Because what's the point of making a little mischief? The same mischief that you might make every year, unless you get people irritated and unless you make headlines in not one country but a bunch of countries. So this map has made headlines, as you would expect, in India, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan. Interestingly, while almost all these countries happen to be the South China Sea countries, countries that sort of are close to South China Sea or along South China Sea, which is a large water body. It's a large water body, 3.7 million square kilometers, which is about the size of all of India, right? So all these countries have coastlines, have coasts on South China Sea. So all of them are hassled by this, which you would expect. But this Chinese map has also got Russia, China's stalwart ally right now, also upset. And finally, after staying silent for about 5 days, that worm has also turned. So the Russians have also now issued a protest saying this is not correct. Our borders had been settled in 2008. And beyond that, even Nepal has got upset. So different countries, different people have their own pain points. Nepal's pain point is actually quite unique. And I figured I was looking for the wrong thing, because the Nepalese are upset not because they think China has taken their territory in their map. They are upset because China has not given India's territory to Nepal in their official map. I will explain it to you. Nepal, not long ago, made formal claims to Limpiodhara and Lipulekh Pass in India, in Uttarakhand state, and also issued a new map showing these as their territories, which their parliament also approved unanimously. So the Nepalese sit on that map, and they were hoping, how touching it is, that the Chinese now, as they issue their own new China standard map, will allocate these territories that they claim from India to Nepal. And because the Chinese have not done it, obviously the Nepalese think that the Chinese are such a big superpower that not only can they grab territory from India, maybe even Arunachal Pradesh, but also that they can allocate India's territories to Nepal just because Nepal claims them. So this map, what is this map? The Chinese issue this map once a year. They issue this map once a year, and the Chinese reaction to response to protests in all the capitals. Capitals of all the affected countries have complained about this. In India, our foreign minister called this absurd. In the Philippines spokesperson said, and I quote, "This China should act responsibly and abide by its obligations." And a week ago, Filipino boats had broken through a Chinese blockade to reach supplies to their troops on one of these islands which the Chinese have barred access to. Malaysia again, if you again see the map of South China Sea, I told you it's like a U-shaped territory, huge one, the size of all of India, 3.7 million square kilometers. Along that, you see Indonesia. It starts with Taiwan in the north or the northeast, and China's Henan Islands. And as you come south, then you come right up to Indonesia, passing Malaysia, Brunei. On the other side, you have Vietnam, and importantly to the east and generally in the middle, as you come down from the north, as you come down from Taiwan, halfway, you also have the Philippines. The Philippines, in fact, the sea lanes along Philippines are the gateway to the Pacific. That's where from Indian Ocean, you go to the Pacific, or from South China Sea, you go to the Pacific. So the Philippines also is an old American ally and also a victim of this Chinese expansionism. So this Chinese line, In fact, we have to understand the lines that the Chinese talk about. There's a 9-dash line and there's a 10-dash line. So I was also confused. What is 9-dash line? What is 10-dash line? All I know is that each one of these countries complain about both of these lines, 9-dash and 10-dash. So originally, if you go back to the 40s when People's Republic of China or the Communist China came into being, they issued a map of their country which had an 11-dash line. A dash is a dash, the punctuation mark. So they put these 11 dashes saying that while this is our territory, our land territory, but we also own so much of South China Sea. That's 90% of South China Sea. 90% of 3.7 million square kilometers. Why? Because they said historically this was ours. If you follow that map, that means it cuts into, it basically takes away all the exclusive economic zones of Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, a lot of that of the Philippines, Vietnam at the other end. And also in any case, this map tells you that Taiwan is a part of China. And that's why it gets everybody upset. Those 11 dashes in the course of time became 9 dashes. Why the Chinese did that? Ask the Chinese. Does it make a difference to any of us? Absolutely doesn't, because the 9 dashes also now claimed the same territory that 11 dashes did. Then in 2013, the Chinese brought in the 10th dash. Please see that. See the two maps, the 9-dash map and the 10-dash map. The 10th dash came to the east of Taiwan, north of the earlier 9th dash. That is, if we are counting anti-clockwise. You count clockwise, you can say above the first dash, right? So that was, why was that 10th dash put in? Because in any case, they were claiming all of Taiwan. That 10th dash was put in the East China Sea, sort of on the northern part of, facing the northern part of Taiwan, because that then gives China better claims. It strengthens China's claims on the Japanese island territories that the Chinese claim. That is the Ryukyu Islands Group. In fact, we featured that dispute in a full episode of Cut The Clutter, of which I'll share a link with you. So this 10th dash was added in 2013. Everybody since then has been dealing with these dashes. These dashes in 2013, Philippines, what I call as Chin Pidit Samaj, they took this case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. So in 2016, they gave an order saying that China's claims based on this 9-dash or 10-dash or 11-dash line was border dash, right? It was nothing. It meant nothing. But surely, like most UN organizations, what this organization said also was not binding on the Chinese. So the Chinese tossed it with contempt and they've carried on as they are. So I was giving you a list of, listing for you the responses. The Philippines said China should act responsibly and abide by its obligations. Philippines also made a reference to the Hague judgment. Then Malaysia said that we reject, and I quote, China's Standard Map 2023 edition. And they also said in this region, which is South China Sea, a code of conduct is needed. Code of conduct obviously applying only to China because the others are behaving themselves as per these states affected by the Chinese cartographic expansionism. Vietnam has said, and again I quote, we resolutely reject any claims based on the dashed line. Dashed line, what the Vietnamese are saying is very important because Vietnam has been getting very impatient with the Chinese. Remember in 1974, the Chinese had come and they had physically came and militarily came and occupied the Paracel Islands. In that attack which the Chinese carried out, at least 70 Vietnamese soldiers in the garrison there were killed. We don't know how many Chinese were killed because those figures are never easy to get. That was 1974. Since then, the Vietnamese have never accepted China's ownership of these islands. And in this region, in between Spratly and Paracel Islands, Chinese at various points of time has started drilling for oil because hydrocarbons presence has been established in this area. Now, what the Chinese are doing besides this, to also buttress their claims, they are creating islands. They're simply conjuring up islands wherever the seas are a bit shallow by taking soil from here and there and building these into living islands and setting up military bases there also. And you know what? Once you own any land in the middle of the sea, anywhere, then 12 nautical miles is your territorial waters and another 200 is your exclusive economic zone. And that's what the Chinese have been trying to do. And that's what all these countries are worried about. Taiwan has as usual said that they reject the 9 or 10 dash lines, and also that Taiwan is absolutely not a part of China. And I told you also why the Nepalese are upset. In fact, the mayor of Kathmandu cancelled his visit to Beijing after the map came out. In fact, a very good understanding of this 9 dash line or 10 dash line or Chinese claims, and also where these islands are located. And this is the article of which a screenshot I am sharing with you. This map that the BBC has drawn from data from the CIA and UNCLOS. UNCLOS or UNCLOS is the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Seas. So if you see this map, this gives you a good idea of what China's claims are. Basically, it's all of South China Sea. As if this sea, the size of India in area, is China's private pond, right? And it's as if none of the countries that fall along this sea have any exclusive economic zones at all. And then in the middle of that also, there are these groups of islands. These are large groups of islands. You see the Spratlys, and a bit northwest of them, you see the Paracel Islands. The Chinese have been claiming this for a long time, especially since oil was found in these areas. And similarly, the Indonesians, the big country along the way, Indonesia has also rejected these claims. In fact, Indonesia, while they were invited to join BRICS, haven't done so. The excuse they're given right now is that they have to put it up to ASEAN first, but it does look like that they are unlike India. They are shy of being in a formulation, in a grouping, which is essentially headed by China, because Indonesia has its own pain points with the Chinese. Indonesia is very vital for us in India because it is there. In fact, if you stretch a line from the farthest point of Nicobar Islands, it isn't that far to Indonesian coast. In fact, you go straight into Malacca Strait and then along Indonesian coastline on both sides. So Indonesia is another major country which is affected by this aggression. With India, the problem is the old one. The Chinese occupy Aksai Chin. They've also claimed, which they always claim, Arunachal Pradesh, which they call South Tibet. It's just that the timing of the release of this map, as far as India is concerned, the map has nothing new. It's the same insult they deliver to India every year, and they've been doing it all the time. The country that is the biggest surprise in this as having been affected, which thought that all their issues with China on the border had already been settled, is Russia. Russia at this point is China's closest strategic friend, or China is Russia's closest strategic friend, because Russia's need is much more than China's need at this point of time. Russia is isolated in the world, at least among the big countries. Russia is not isolated in what is called as the global south, but it is isolated among the big powers, and it needs big power allies. When you look at big power allies, there are only two countries who are not inimical to Russia. One of them, China, is very friendly with Russia. India is reasonably friendly with Russia, because in India, it's also a case of Masburi. There are many compulsions. At the same time, there is history of a deep and strong relationship with Russia, and India wants to keep this autonomy. But besides that, the Russians right now are a bit isolated in the big power systems. China is very important for them. And the Chinese this time, in this map, have suddenly laid claims to an island, to half an island, which they had accepted as being part of Russia. Now, this is the Ussuri River dispute. So island is called the Bolshoi-Ussuriski Island. So the island is about 300 square kilometers in size. It's called the Bolshoi-Ussuriski Island. This is at the confluence of Ussuri and Amur rivers, somewhere in the north of China, beyond the city of Harbin, not far from, somewhere in the north of China, beyond the city of Harbin, sort of in the Manchurian region. Strategic areas for China, strategic areas for Russia as well, because if you look at the map, the larger size, the Sakhalin territory, where Russia has a lot of their oil reserves, is not far away. In fact, that's where ONGC also has some investments. Now, this island is what the Russians and the Chinese fought a bitter military conflict over, where hundreds of lives were lost in 1969. That event also proved to be a turning point in the history of the world. And in fact, because the Chinese have again laid claims to this island, they fought with the Russians over this island. Then That tension continued for a long time. 1989, 90, Soviet Union collapsed. 1991, there were talks. The Russians accepted Chinese ownership of some of the other territories, particularly in the Xinjiang region or Xinjiang region. That's also where the two countries had fought border clashes. But these three islands along these rivers, Yinlong, Zhenbao and Ussuriski, Bolshoi Ussuriski, these Russians still claimed. Subsequently, however, there was a settlement. These negotiations then carried on in 2003, then 2005. 2005 negotiations were carried out and a settlement was arrived between Li Zhaoqing, the Chinese foreign minister, and his Russian counterpart. Who else but Sergei Lavrov, who will come representing Putin at the G20 in Delhi. After that, the two sides exchanged their maps. They exchanged their maps. The agreement was that while two of the islands will now belong fully to China, the third island of which much of the fighting had taken place, that is Bolshoi Ussuriski, Russia said, look, we can't give away all of the island because this has become part of our urban entity of Khabarovsk, the city of Khabarovsk, and our people are living there, so we can't give it up. So the two countries agreed to split that island 50-50. And that map was exchanged. Both sides endorsed the map. Those maps then were later also endorsed by the Chinese People's Congress's Standing Committee, which is the final stamp of authority, And also in Russia, it was voted and approved by the Dumas. So both parliaments, or one parliament and the equivalent of the other parliament, approved it, and that settlement was done. And that's what surprised the Russians. So Russians took 5 days responding, but obviously they figured that it was their territory, and not responding, not protesting would make them look like really a vassal state to the Chinese. So they spoke up today. So Maria Zakharova, Russian spokesperson, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, she said there is no question of reopening a border issue which has been settled. It was settled finally in 2005, 2008. Both countries have a common position and no change is expected and no change is accepted. So even the Russians protested. Now, because I started reading about the Chinese-Russian boundary dispute, it also took me back to something very interesting that happened in the year 1969. And I can't let you go without giving you some idea, because that determined the future of the world from then on. 1969, by that time, Russia-Chinese relations or Soviet-Chinese relations had become really bad. They had become so bad that on 23rd of August 1968, speaking at the Romanian embassy in Beijing, Zhou Enlai, who was the Chinese premier, he had accused Soviet Union of having fascist policies. He had condemned the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. He had said, he had compared it to Hitler's invasion of Czechoslovakia. He had also suggested in that speech that Czechs should take to guerrilla fighting to get the Soviets out of there. That's how bad the Soviet-Chinese relations had become by then. I'm taking you back to 23rd August 1968. Then we come to 1969, which is a key year. And I will tell you why 1969 is a key year. 2nd March 1969 is when fighting breaks out. Fighting breaks out in the Ussuri River area. Fighting breaks out. Both sides suffer heavy casualties. How heavy the fighting was, both sides had their own claims about casualties. Russians said they had some 60-70 killed. Chinese said they had about 30-40 killed. Russians claim hundreds of Chinese were killed. So nobody quite knows how many died on either side. How intense that fighting was, you can guess from the fact, you can assess from the fact that the Russians gave away their top gallantry award, Hero of the Soviet Union, to 5 of their military men. 5. In one set of clashes. And this is the great Soviet army which doesn't easily give away these gallantry awards. Russians said they lost 58 lives. Chinese claim they lost only 28 lives. Russians claim that in one battle alone the Chinese lost 238 lives. But these are claims and counterclaims. But the fact is that 2nd March, on 2nd March these clashes started. Then clashes took place in Xinjiang and other regions also. Then see how time moves. 1st to the 24th April 1969, we're in the same year. 1st to the 24th April 1969, Chinese People's Congress takes place. This is the ninth Chinese People's Congress. At the ninth Chinese People's Congress, Mao comes to speak, and Mao declares that the Cultural Revolution has now ended. Cultural Revolution, which had started in May of 1966, the steep deterioration in Chinese-Soviet relationship started with the Cultural Revolution. Now he said the Cultural Revolution was over. It was around this time that some other interesting moves were taking place. For example, August 1, 1969, Richard Nixon visited Pakistan. He knew by now that the Chinese and Soviets were almost at war with each other, so he thought, why not play with that divide? So he came to Pakistan and he requested his Pakistani counterpart to send word to the Chinese leadership that the Americans wanted to talk with them and that he was happy to visit China. The Pakistanis promised to send word. Just after that, straight from Pakistan, he went to Bucharest. In Bucharest, he spoke with Ceausescu, the Romanian leader, and again made the same request because Ceausescu was seen to be close to the Chinese leadership and to be pro-China. In fact, after the Usuri clashes, the Soviets had tried to hold a Warsaw Pact meeting and to get a statement condemning China. It was Romania's Ceausescu who vetoed that statement. Later, at a meeting of 66 communist nations or nations led by communist parties in Moscow, the Soviets again tried to get a joint resolution condemning China. It didn't happen because of Ceausescu's opposition. So Nixon reached out to Ceausescu. Ceausescu also delivered his promise to Nixon on 7th September the same year. All of this is happening in the same weeks of 1969. So 7th September, Ho Chi Minh had died. His Prime Minister, George Maurer, went to Hanoi to attend the funeral. At that funeral, he took Zhou Enlai aside and again told him that Nixon wanted to visit China. That's where it started. How bad the Chinese-Soviet relations were at that time, that Mao came to the funeral. But the Chinese made sure that their leader will not be in the same room as his Soviet counterpart at the same time. That's how bad the relationship was. And we know what happened after that. We know 1971, we know the big American outreach to China, and that is something that completely redefined and changed and revolutionized geopolitics, effects of which we see even now. And we Indians are also victims of what happened between China and America in 1971. It began in 1969, as you can see, and this became such a close partnership between America and China at that point that in the 70s, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the Chinese went ahead and helped the Mujahideen alongside the Americans and the Pakistanis to fight the Soviets and defeat the Soviets. Today, the wheel has turned full circle, that China is more or less an ally of the Russians, which is fighting a full-fledged war with a NATO and American-backed adversary in Ukraine, and where India and America have now become essential strategic allies. And you know how important these dashes are and how sensitive territorial issues are, because Barbie the film got banned in Vietnam because in one childishly or amateurishly or casually drawn graphic, they showed the 9-dash line. Of course, they only used 8 dashes, so I'm surprised that the Chinese didn't ban the movie as well.